My brother Chris pinned me to the hardwood floor of our deceased father's house, his fists connecting with my ribs as he demanded I sign over the mortgage deed. Blood dripped from my split lip onto the legal documents scattered around us like confetti at a nightmare celebration. My sister-in-law Patricia stood over us, her cold eyes gleaming with satisfaction as she hissed the chilling words that still haunt my dreams. "Do it, Chris. End her." The violence escalated as his knuckles found my cheekbone stars exploding behind my eyelids. Just when I thought consciousness would abandon me completely, a mysterious voice behind them commanded with absolute authority, "Stop." That voice would change everything I thought I knew about my family's deadly secrets. 3 weeks before that terrifying moment on the floor, our father Harold passed suddenly from a heart attack at 62. I'm Rosalie, 28 years old, and I had spent the last 4 years caring for Dad during his declining health, while working full-time as a dental hygienist in suburban Columbus, Ohio. Chris lived 40 minutes away with Patricia and their twin boys, visiting maybe once a month if we were lucky. As the eldest daughter who had sacrificed dating career advancement and my own apartment to ensure Dad received proper care, I naturally expected to inherit the family home where I'd been living. The 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Street held every childhood memory we had, from learning to ride bikes in the driveway to family barbecues in the backyard. Attorney Margaret Stevens called us to her downtown office for the will reading on a gray Tuesday morning. Her mahogany-paneled conference room smelled of old leather and coffee as she delivered news that shattered my assumptions. Harold had modified his will just 5 days before his death, splitting everything equally between his 3 children, myself, Chris, and our younger sister Beth, who was finishing nursing school at Ohio State. "Your father wanted to ensure fairness among all his children," Margaret explained, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses as she read the document aloud. The house, valued at $215,000, would need to be sold unless all 3 siblings agreed on an alternative arrangement. Chris immediately leaned forward in his chair, his construction worker hands clasped tightly. "We need to sell quickly and split the money 3 ways. I've got bills piling up, and this inheritance couldn't come at a better time." I felt my stomach drop. "Chris, this isn't just about money. This house represents everything Dad built for us. All our memories are here." "Memories don't pay mortgages, Rosalie." Patricia interjected, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the conference table. She had dressed up for the occasion in a navy blue business suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. "Chris has responsibilities. We have 2 boys to think about, college funds to establish." Beth remained quiet, nervously twisting her nursing school ring. At 24, she had always been the peacekeeper in our family, avoiding confrontation whenever possible. Over the following days, Chris became increasingly aggressive about forcing a sale. He would show up at the house unannounced, bringing real estate agents without my permission, and scheduling appraisals while I was at work. When I changed the locks, he accused me of being selfish and controlling. "You think because you lived with Dad that you deserve more than the rest of us," he shouted during one particularly heated argument in the kitchen. His face had turned red, veins visible in his neck. "But legally we're equal owners now, and I'm not letting you hold up this sale." Something felt wrong about Chris's desperation. My brother had always been hot-headed, but this level of urgency seemed extreme even for him. I started paying closer attention to his behavior and noticed things that troubled me. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous habit of checking his phone constantly. Patricia seemed unusually interested in real estate websites, bookmarking properties far beyond what a construction worker and part-time administrative assistant could afford. My suspicions led me to investigate further. While cleaning out Dad's home office, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Hidden behind his filing cabinet, I found bank statements that Chris must have overlooked. The documents revealed that Chris had been Dad's financial power of attorney for the past 8 months, a fact none of us knew. The statements showed systematic withdrawals totaling $45,000 over the previous 6 months. Each withdrawal was for amounts just under $10,000, clearly designed to avoid triggering automatic bank reporting requirements. The memo lines claimed medical expenses and prescription costs, but I knew Dad's Medicare and supplemental insurance had covered all his legitimate medical needs. When I confronted Chris with the evidence, his reaction confirmed my worst fears. Instead of denying the theft, he became defensive and angry. Dad needed care. You couldn't provide. Those were legitimate expenses. Show me the receipts, Chris. Show me one medical bill that required $45,000 in cash payments. He couldn't because they didn't exist. My brother had been systematically stealing from our dying father while I was working double shifts to pay for groceries and utilities. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. The climactic revelation came when I discovered the real reason behind Chris's theft. While searching through his truck one evening when he visited, I found a folder containing gambling debts from 3 different casinos in West Virginia. The total amount owed was $87,000 with payment due dates that had already passed. Threatening letters from collection agencies filled the folder, some mentioning severe consequences for continued non-payment. Chris hadn't just stolen from Dad for general financial relief. He had gambled away nearly $90,000 and was facing threats from people who didn't accept excuses. His desperation to sell the house wasn't about providing for his family's future. It was about survival in the present. Understanding Chris's gambling problem helped explain his behavior, but it raised even more disturbing questions about Patricia's role in the situation. Over the 6 years since Chris married her, I had watched my brother transform from someone who occasionally bought lottery tickets into a person who disappeared for entire weekends claiming he was working construction jobs that never seemed to pay him. Patricia had always struck me as calculating, but I initially attributed this to her ambition. She came from a working-class family but carried herself like someone destined for wealth and status. Her sister Melissa had married a successful orthodontist, and Patricia constantly compared their lifestyle to what Chris could provide. Melissa just bought a new BMW, she would mention during family dinners. Dr. Rodriguez surprised her with it for their anniversary. Isn't that romantic? These comments always left Chris looking dejected and inadequate. I began to notice how Patricia would plant seeds of dissatisfaction, making Chris feel like his honest work wasn't enough to make her happy. Beth had been observing Patricia longer than any of us realized. During a quiet conversation while we sorted through Dad's belongings, my younger sister revealed troubling details about Patricia's behavior. She's been researching property law online, Beth told me, glancing around nervously as if Patricia might overhear. I saw her browser history when I borrowed her laptop for school research. She had been studying forced property sales partition actions and inheritance disputes. This revelation sent chills down my spine. Patricia hadn't been passively supporting Chris's desire to sell the house. She had been actively researching legal strategies to force me into compliance. Beth continued, "She also had files about property development in our neighborhood. I think she's been planning this for longer than we realized." My investigation into Patricia's activities revealed a web of deception that went far beyond supporting her husband's gambling habit. Through social media detective work, I discovered she had been meeting regularly with someone named Marcus Thompson, a real estate developer who specialized in buying older residential properties for conversion into luxury condominiums. Marcus Thompson's LinkedIn profile showed he had been targeting neighborhoods like ours, where aging homeowners might be vulnerable to below-market buyout offers. His strategy involved purchasing properties at reduced prices, then demolishing them to build high-density housing that sold for premium rates. The shocking truth emerged when I found text messages on Patricia's phone, which she had carelessly left unlocked while using the bathroom during one of their visits. The messages revealed an affair that had been ongoing for 8 months, exactly coinciding with when Chris's gambling problem had escalated. "Once we get the house, Marcus can close quickly at $200,000, one message read. That's $15,000 below appraisal, but still enough for Chris to pay his debts plus our finder's fee." Marcus had replied, "The development permits are already approved. If you can deliver by month's end, I'll guarantee you the penthouse unit at cost plus $50,000 cash." Patricia had been manipulating Chris's financial desperation to serve her own agenda. She hadn't just enabled his gambling, she had actively encouraged it by introducing him to high-stakes poker games where she knew he would lose money. Several messages referenced poker night at Danny's warehouse, where Patricia had convinced Chris to join games with stakes far beyond his means. The manipulation went even deeper. Patricia had been feeding Chris false information about my intentions, telling him I was planning to force him out of any inheritance entirely. She convinced him that I had been Dad's favorite, and that the will modification was just the beginning of my plan to exclude him and Beth from family assets. "Rosalie thinks she deserves everything because she lived with your father," she had told him. "She's probably hiding money and assets you don't even know about. You need to act fast before she figures out how to cut you out completely." None of this was true, but Patricia's poison worked effectively on Chris's guilty conscience and financial desperation. She had turned my caring for Dad into evidence of my selfishness, and my desire to preserve our family home into proof of my greed. The most disturbing discovery was Patricia's timeline. Her relationship with Marcus had begun just 2 weeks after Dad's cancer diagnosis, 8 months earlier. She hadn't waited for Dad to die to start planning the sale of his house. She had been working toward this goal since learning he was sick. Text messages revealed Patricia had been updating Marcus on Dad's health status, providing regular reports about his declining condition, and estimating how much longer he might live. The cold calculation in these messages was inhuman. "Harold's been in and out of the hospital 3 times this month," she had written. "Chris thinks it could be any day now. Are you ready to move quickly when it happens?" Patricia had viewed our father's final months not as a time for family to come together, but as a business opportunity requiring careful timing and execution. She had been treating his approaching death like a real estate closing, managing variables and preparing for the transaction that would fund her new life with Marcus. The voice that commanded Chris to stop belonged to someone I thought I would never see again. Samuel Mitchell stood in the doorway of Dad's living room looking older, but unmistakably alive. He was supposed to be dead or at least permanently missing, having disappeared 15 years ago following a bitter business dispute with Dad that had split our family. Samuel was Dad's younger brother, 2 years his junior, and they had been business partners until a construction project went wrong in 2009. Accusations flew about missing funds and cutting corners on safety inspections. The partnership dissolved in lawsuits and harsh words, with Samuel eventually leaving Ohio entirely. We heard rumors over the years that he had died in a car accident in Arizona, but no one had bothered to verify the information. Now Samuel stood before us very much alive, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look like any other middle-aged man you might see at a hardware store. His hair had gone completely gray, and lines mapped the years across his face, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence I remembered from childhood. "Let her go, Chris." Samuel said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We need to have a conversation about what's really been happening here." Chris released his grip on my arm, stumbling backward in shock. "Uncle Samuel, but everyone said you were dead." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Samuel replied dryly, stepping into the room with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "I've been living in Oregon under the name Samuel Rogers, working as a private investigator. Turns out the skills that made me a good construction manager translated well to investigating insurance fraud and missing persons cases." Patricia had gone pale, her earlier confidence evaporating as she realized an unknown variable had entered her carefully planned equation. "How long have you been watching us?" "Long enough," Samuel answered, pulling a digital recorder from his jacket pocket. "Long enough to document Chris's theft from Harold's accounts. Long enough to photograph your meetings with Marcus Thompson. Long enough to gather evidence of your affair and your conspiracy to defraud the estate." I struggled to sit up, my ribs aching from Chris's assault. "Samuel, how did you know what was happening here?" "I set up monitoring alerts on Harold's bank accounts years ago, back when we were still speaking. Call it insurance against future family drama. When I saw unusual withdrawal patterns starting 6 months ago, I began investigating remotely from Oregon." Samuel moved to the window, glancing outside as if checking for something. The alerts escalated when Harold died suddenly. A healthy 62-year-old man with good medical care doesn't usually drop dead from a heart attack unless something else is involved. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Samuel was suggesting Dad's death might not have been natural. Harold contacted me 2 weeks before he died. Samuel continued, his voice softening with genuine grief. "First time we had spoken in 15 years. He was worried about Chris's behavior and wanted my advice on changing his will to protect you, Rosalie. He said Chris had been asking strange questions about his finances and seemed desperate about something." Chris sank into Dad's old recliner, his head in his hands. "I never meant for any of this to happen. The gambling started small, just weekend trips to the casino with Patricia. But then I started losing, and she said I could win it back if I played higher stakes games." "She introduced you to those games, didn't she?" Samuel asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Patricia said her friend Danny ran a poker game where construction guys could make real money. She said I was too conservative, that I'd never get ahead playing it safe." Chris looked up at his wife with dawning realization. "You set me up. You led me into those games knowing I'd lose." Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. "You're weak, Chris. You were always going to fail eventually. I just accelerated the timeline and made sure we could benefit from the collapse." Samuel produced a thick manila folder from his jacket. "I have documentation of everything. The gambling debts, the stolen money, the affair, the conspiracy with Marcus Thompson. But there's more that you don't know yet." He spread photographs across Dad's coffee table. They showed Patricia entering a pharmacy 50 miles away, using what appeared to be false identification to purchase prescription medications. Other photos captured her visiting Dad's house on multiple occasions when I was at work, despite her claims that she rarely visited because Dad disliked her. "Patricia, would you like to explain why you were purchasing Digitalis under the name Margaret Foster, or why your cell phone records show you were here at Harold's house 12 times in the month before his death, always when Rosalie was working?" The room fell completely silent except for the old grandfather clock in the hallway marking time with its steady tick. Patricia's face had gone from pale to ashen, her hands trembling as she stared at the photographs. "Digitalis is a heart medication," Samuel explained, "for our benefit. In controlled doses, it treats heart conditions. In larger doses, or when given to someone with a healthy heart, it causes symptoms that mimic a natural heart attack. It's nearly impossible to detect unless you know to look for it specifically. I felt the world tilt beneath me. You're saying Patricia poisoned Dad? I'm saying the evidence suggests Harold's death wasn't natural, and Patricia had both motive and opportunity to cause it. She needed Harold to die before he could change his will back to protect you, and she needed access to the house to execute her plan with Marcus Thompson. Chris stood up abruptly, his face a mask of horror as he stared at his wife. Patricia, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't kill my father. But Patricia's silence spoke louder than any confession could have. Samuel's revelation about potential murder transformed our family crisis into something far more sinister. As a private investigator, he had contacts within law enforcement who could expedite testing that might have taken months through normal channels. I submitted a formal request for expanded toxicology testing 3 days ago, Samuel explained as we gathered around Dad's kitchen table. The original autopsy was routine for what appeared to be a natural death, but digitalis poisoning requires specific testing protocols. Detective Angela Rodriguez from the Columbus Police Department arrived within 2 hours of Samuel's call. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately commanded respect. Mr. Rogers has been cooperating with our investigation for the past week, Detective Rodriguez explained using Samuel's assumed name. The evidence he's gathered is substantial, but we need to follow proper legal procedures to ensure everything is admissible in court. The detective spread new photographs across the table, images that made my stomach churn. Security footage from Eastside Pharmacy showed Patricia purchasing digitalis tablets using identification in the name Margaret Foster, a name that belonged to a woman who had died in a car accident 3 months earlier. Identity theft, prescription fraud, and potentially first-degree murder. Detective Rodriguez listed grimly. Mrs. Mitchell, did you have any indication your sister-in-law might be capable of violence? I thought back over the years, remembering small incidents that had seemed insignificant at the time. Patricia's coldness when Chris's grandmother had died. Her calculating questions about Dad's medications during his cancer treatment. Her unusual interest in my work schedule and Dad's daily routines. She always asked very specific questions about Dad's health. I realized, when I thought she was being caring, she might have been gathering intelligence for her plan. Samuel produced additional evidence that painted an even darker picture. Bank records showed Patricia had been researching untraceable financial transactions and had opened a safety deposit box under her false identity. Cell phone data placed her at Dad's house on the exact days when he had complained to me about feeling unusually tired and weak. Harold called you twice during his final week, didn't he? Samuel asked me gently. I nodded, remembering those conversations with painful clarity. He said he was having trouble sleeping and felt dizzy when he stood up. I thought it was normal aging, maybe medication side effects from his blood pressure pills. Those are classic symptoms of digitalis poisoning when administered in small doses over time, Detective Rodriguez explained. The killer builds up the drug in the victim's system, gradually making the final lethal dose appear like sudden cardiac failure. Chris had remained silent during most of this revelation, his face cycling through shock, grief, and rage. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She asked me to get Dad's medical information, said she wanted to research his conditions online to better understand what he was going through. He looked at Patricia with absolute devastation. I gave you his prescription list, his doctor's contact information, even his Medicare details. I thought you were trying to help. Patricia finally broke her silence, but not with remorse or confession. Instead, she revealed the calculating mind that had orchestrated everything. Harold was going to ruin everything, she said coldly. He called Chris the night before he died, said he was going to the police about the missing money, said he was changing his will back to cut Chris out entirely unless he returned every stolen dollar within 48 hours. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Patricia had essentially confessed to murder while attempting to justify it as protecting her family's financial future. "You killed him to prevent him from reporting Chris to the police," Detective Rodriguez stated, making notes in her official pad. "I protected my children's inheritance," Patricia corrected. Harold was being vindictive and cruel. Chris made mistakes, but he didn't deserve to lose everything and go to prison. Samuel shook his head in disgust. "So you decided Harold deserved to die instead?" Harold was old and sick. He had maybe 5 good years left, probably fewer. Chris has 30 or 40 years to provide for his family. The mathematics were obvious. The cold calculation in Patricia's voice chilled me more than any screaming rage could have. She had weighed my father's remaining life against her desired lifestyle and decided his death was an acceptable cost for her comfort. Detective Rodriguez revealed that Patricia's planning had been even more extensive than we realized. Search warrants executed on her computer showed months of research into inheritance law, untraceable poisons, and methods for staging accidental deaths. She had considered multiple approaches before settling on digitalis poisoning. She researched drowning falls downstairs and even carbon monoxide poisoning, the detective reported. But digitalis offered the best combination of being difficult to detect and easy to administer without the victim's knowledge. The most disturbing discovery was Patricia's backup plan. If the digitalis hadn't worked, or if Dad had survived long enough to change his will, she had been prepared to escalate to more direct methods. Hidden in her car, investigators found a loaded handgun and detailed notes about Dad's daily routines, including times when he would be alone and vulnerable. "She was going to kill him one way or another," Samuel concluded grimly. "The heart attack just happened to work cleanly." Chris finally broke down, completely sobbing as the full scope of his wife's betrayal became clear. "Dad died because of my gambling debts. If I hadn't stolen that money, Patricia never would have needed to kill him. Chris, your father died because your wife is a sociopath who saw murder as a business solution," Detective Rodriguez corrected firmly. "You made serious mistakes, but Patricia made the choice to commit murder. That responsibility belongs entirely to her." As evidence mounted against Patricia, she began attempting to manipulate the situation one final time. She claimed Chris had been the mastermind, that she was just a frightened wife following her husband's desperate plan. She suggested I had been in on the scheme, eager to inherit the house regardless of the cost. But her lies couldn't stand against the mountain of evidence Samuel and Detective Rodriguez had compiled. Financial records, security footage, cell phone data, and forensic evidence created a timeline that clearly established Patricia as the primary perpetrator of a premeditated murder conspiracy. The investigation revealed that Patricia had been planning this scenario for over a year, ever since learning about Dad's cancer diagnosis. She had viewed his illness not as a family crisis requiring support, but as an opportunity requiring careful preparation and timing. While Detective Rodriguez coordinated the investigation with forensic specialists, Beth surprised all of us by revealing she had been conducting her own covert operation. My youngest sister, who had always seemed passive and conflict avoidant, had actually been one step ahead of everyone. "I've been recording Patricia's conversations for 3 months," Beth announced quietly, producing a small digital device from her purse. "I suspected something was wrong when I helped take care of Dad during his final weeks." Beth's nursing education had made her sensitive to medication effects and drug interactions. When Dad described his symptoms during his last month, she recognized signs that didn't match his prescribed medications or known health conditions. Weakness, dizziness, irregular heartbeat, nausea. Beth listed. Those symptoms suggested digitalis toxicity, but Dad wasn't taking any heart medications. I started paying closer attention to who had access to his food and drinks. The recordings Beth had captured were devastating to Patricia's attempts at manipulation. Clear audio captured Patricia confessing to Marcus Thompson about poisoning Dad and her detailed plans to frame Chris if the investigation came too close. Once Harold is gone, Chris will be desperate enough to do anything I tell him, Patricia's voice said clearly through the device's speaker. If the police start asking questions, I'll make sure all the evidence points to him. Grieving widow discovers husband's terrible crimes, that kind of story. Beth had hidden recording devices in Chris's garage where Patricia often went to make private phone calls. The audio revealed Patricia coaching Marcus on exactly how much to offer for the house and when to make the bid to appear legitimate. Wait 2 weeks after the funeral before making initial contact, Patricia instructed. Offer sympathy first, then mention you've been looking for property in the neighborhood. Make it seem like fortunate timing, not planned coordination. The recordings also captured Patricia's attempts to recruit Beth as an accomplice. Your sister is being selfish about the house, Patricia had said. If Chris goes to prison for the money he took, what happens to my boys? You could help us by confirming that Harold was acting strange before he died, maybe suggest he was getting senile or depressed. When Beth refused to lie about Dad's mental state, Patricia became threatening. You have access to medications through your nursing program, she had warned. If this investigation goes the wrong way, it would be easy to suggest you were the one with both knowledge and opportunity to poison Harold. Beth's courage in secretly documenting these conversations had provided law enforcement with evidence that couldn't be disputed or explained away. Patricia's own words established premeditation motive and her willingness to frame family members to protect herself. Detective Rodriguez praised Beth's initiative while also expressing concern about the danger she had placed herself in. You gathered crucial evidence, but Patricia clearly viewed you as a threat. She might have escalated to violence against you if she had discovered what you were doing. The recordings revealed additional crimes beyond murder and fraud. Patricia had been systematically stealing small amounts of cash from Dad's wallet during her visits, taking advantage of his declining attention to detail. She had also been photographing valuable items in the house, apparently cataloging assets for future theft or sale. She took pictures of Mom's jewelry, Dad's coin collection, even his vintage tools in the garage, Beth reported. I think she was planning to claim Chris had given her these things as gifts or that they were part of her inheritance share. Most shocking was Patricia's casual discussion of potential future victims. The recordings captured her telling Marcus about other elderly relatives in both families who might be opportunities if their current plan proved successful. Chris's grandfather on his mother's side owns rental properties worth at least $500,000, Patricia had mused. He's 86 and lives alone. If something happened to him, Chris would inherit everything as the eldest grandson. This revelation horrified Chris even more than learning about his father's murder. She was planning to kill Grandpa Turner too. He's been nothing but kind to our family. Patricia's response, captured clearly on Beth's recording, demonstrated the depth of her sociopathy. Kind doesn't pay college tuition or mortgages. If we're going to secure our family's future, we need to think strategically about assets and opportunities. The recordings also documented Patricia's backup plan for eliminating witnesses if her schemes were discovered. She had researched methods for staging accidents that could kill multiple people simultaneously, including carbon monoxide poisoning and house fires. Beth had stopped recording after that conversation, finally understanding that her sister-in-law was capable of murdering not just Dad, but potentially all of us if it served her purposes. I was terrified, Beth admitted. But I knew if I went to the police without enough evidence, Patricia would find a way to make me disappear before I could testify. Detective Rodriguez assured Beth that her evidence would be more than sufficient to convict Patricia of first-degree murder conspiracy and multiple other felonies. The recordings provided clear proof of premeditation and motive that would be impossible for any defense attorney to explain away. As we listened to Patricia's recorded confessions, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and horror. Vindication that my instincts about her manipulation had been correct, and horror at discovering how close our entire family had come to being murdered by someone we had trusted and welcomed into our lives. Chris sat in stunned silence as the full scope of his wife's betrayal became clear. She hadn't just manipulated his gambling problem. She had actively encouraged his descent into addiction specifically to create the desperation she needed to execute her murder plan. She introduced me to Danny's poker game, he said slowly, pieces falling into place. She insisted I attend, said I needed to network with other businessmen. When I started losing, she encouraged me to bet higher, said I was just having bad luck that would turn around. The recordings confirmed Chris's growing understanding. Patricia had been working with Danny, the poker game organizer, to ensure Chris would lose consistently. They had been cheating him systematically while she tracked his growing desperation and planned her approach to Harold. Beth's evidence had transformed our family tragedy into an open and shut criminal case. Patricia's own words would convict her, and her elaborate plans for future murders would ensure she never had another opportunity to harm innocent people. As law enforcement prepared to arrest Patricia, she made one final desperate attempt to eliminate the witnesses who could testify against her. Her facade of grieving daughter-in-law completely dropped, revealing the calculating killer she had always been beneath the surface. Detective Rodriguez had advised us to stay together for safety while the warrant was processed, but Patricia used Chris's emotional breakdown as an opportunity to suggest a family meeting at Dad's house. "We need to discuss how to handle this situation as a family before lawyers get involved," she said. Beth and I were reluctant, but Chris begged us to give Patricia a chance to explain herself. "Maybe there's something we don't understand," he pleaded. "Maybe she was trying to protect us in some misguided way." Against our better judgment, we agreed to meet at the house the next morning. Patricia arrived with coffee and pastries from our favorite bakery, claiming she wanted to make peace and discuss our options. "I know you think I'm a terrible person." She began setting the coffee tray on Dad's kitchen table. "But everything I did was to protect this family's future. Harold was going to destroy Chris's life over a debt that could have been resolved differently." The coffee smelled wonderful, and I was exhausted from the emotional trauma of recent revelations. I took a large sip before noticing a slight bitter aftertaste that seemed wrong for the regular blend I always ordered. Beth drank hers without hesitation, trusting Patricia's apparent peace offering. Within minutes, my sister began looking drowsy and disoriented. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled and she collapsed to the kitchen floor. "Beth!" I screamed, dropping my cup and rushing to help her. The remaining coffee splattered across the linoleum, and I noticed a fine white residue settled at the bottom of the cup. Patricia watched Beth's collapse with cold satisfaction rather than alarm. "Digitalis works much faster when dissolved in hot coffee," she explained conversationally. "Beth will be unconscious within 5 minutes and dead within 20. You would have followed shortly if you had finished your drink." The mask had finally come off completely. Patricia stood over us with the detached interest of a scientist observing lab rats, no longer bothering to pretend concern or affection. "You were never supposed to find Samuel's evidence," she continued. "The plan was for Chris to be blamed for Harold's death, serve a short prison sentence for manslaughter, and emerge to find his inheritance intact and his debts cleared. But you had to keep digging, asking questions, making everything complicated. I knelt beside Beth, checking her pulse and trying to remember emergency medical procedures. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "Call 911!" I shouted at Chris, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Chris won't be calling anyone," Patricia said matter-of-factly. "He's finally going to prove he loves me more than his meddling sisters. Aren't you, darling?" But Chris didn't respond the way Patricia expected. Instead of following her command, he stared at his unconscious sister with dawning horror. "You're trying to kill them both. You actually poisoned Beth right in front of me." "Beth was going to testify against us," Patricia explained patiently, as if talking to a slow child. "Her recordings would have sent us both to prison for life. This way, it looks like she accidentally took too much of her own medication, and Rosalie was tragically caught in the crossfire." "Beth doesn't take heart medication," Chris said slowly. "She will when the paramedics find her prescription bottle in her purse," Patricia replied, producing a pill bottle from her jacket pocket. "Amazing how easy it is to get prescriptions filled when you know the right pharmacy technicians." I realized Patricia had been planning this contingency for some time. She had forged prescriptions and planted evidence to make Beth's murder look like accidental overdose, while my death would appear to be a tragic case of shared contaminated medication. The most chilling part was Patricia's calm demeanor as she explained her plan. She showed no emotion about murdering 2 more family members, discussing logistics with the same tone she might use to plan a grocery shopping trip. "What about your sons?" I gasped, still trying to help Beth. "How do you explain to them that their aunt and uncle are dead?" "Children are resilient," Patricia answered dismissively. "They'll remember you fondly but move on quickly. And they'll have excellent college funds thanks to the insurance money and property sale proceeds." That was when Chris finally understood the full scope of his wife's sociopathy. She was willing to murder his entire family, traumatize their children, and send him to prison, all to fund a lifestyle upgrade and eliminate inconvenient witnesses to her crimes. "You never loved me," he said quietly. "I was just a tool you used to get access to my family's money. Love is a luxury for people who don't have to worry about financial security," Patricia replied. "You were useful, Chris, but you were never the long-term plan. Marcus offers better opportunities." Chris moved toward the phone to call for help, but Patricia produced a handgun from her purse, pointing it steadily at his chest. "Sit down, Chris. You're going to help me stage this properly, or you'll be victim number 3. But Patricia had miscalculated Chris's breaking point. Seeing his youngest sister dying on the kitchen floor because of his wife's greed finally shattered whatever hold she had maintained over him. Instead of obeying, he lunged forward and grabbed her gun hand, wrestling for control of the weapon. "You killed my father!" Chris shouted as they struggled. "You were going to kill my sisters. You were planning to murder Grandpa Turner." The physical struggle was brief but intense. Chris's construction work had given him strength that Patricia couldn't match despite her desperation. He managed to pin her against the kitchen counter and wrench the gun away. "Call 911 right now," he ordered, pointing the weapon at his wife while keeping one eye on Beth's unconscious form. As sirens approached in the distance, Patricia made one final attempt at manipulation. "Chris, think about our boys. If you let me go, we can disappear together. Start fresh somewhere new. You'll never see your sisters again anyway once you go to prison for helping steal Harold's money." But Chris had finally seen Patricia's true nature, and her words no longer held power over him. "My sons deserve better than a mother who murders people for money," he said firmly. "And my sisters deserve justice for what you've done to our family." When paramedics arrived, they immediately began treating Beth for digitalis poisoning. The quick response, combined with her youth and overall health, gave her excellent chances for complete recovery. Detective Rodriguez arrested Patricia for attempted murder, with additional charges of first-degree murder in Dad's death conspiracy fraud and weapons violations. As officers led her away in handcuffs, Patricia's final words were not apologies or expressions of remorse, but complaints about how her arrest would affect her children's social standing. Chris voluntarily surrendered to face charges for his theft from Dad's accounts, but his cooperation in stopping Patricia's final murder attempt would be considered during sentencing. For the first time since this nightmare began, my brother seemed like the person I had grown up loving and respecting. 6 months later, justice had been served in ways that felt both satisfying and healing for our family. Patricia faced trial for first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder fraud conspiracy, and multiple other felonies. The evidence against her was overwhelming, from Beth's recordings to forensic proof of digitalis poisoning to Samuel's documented investigation of her crimes. The trial lasted 3 weeks, during which Patricia's defense attorneys attempted to portray her as a desperate mother trying to protect her family's financial future. They argued that Chris's gambling addiction had driven her to extreme measures, and that Harold's death was an unintended consequence of her attempt to prevent Chris from going to prison. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Chen, systematically dismantled these arguments. Beth's recordings proved premeditation and revealed Patricia's cold calculation in planning multiple murders. The attempted poisoning of Beth and myself demonstrated that Patricia was willing to kill anyone who threatened her schemes, regardless of their innocence or family relationships. Marcus Thompson, Patricia's lover and co-conspirator, testified against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed the full scope of Patricia's planning, including her research into other potential victims and her long-term strategy for accessing family assets through murder. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Patricia received life imprisonment without possibility of parole for Harold's murder, plus additional consecutive sentences for attempted murder and conspiracy charges. She would never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people. Marcus Thompson received 15 years for conspiracy and fraud, though he would be eligible for parole after serving 60% of his sentence. His cooperation with prosecutors and lack of direct involvement in the murders resulted in the lighter punishment. Chris's case was handled separately, with consideration given to his cooperation in stopping Patricia's final murder attempt and his genuine remorse for stealing from Dad. He pleaded guilty to elder financial abuse and theft, receiving a sentence of 3 years in minimum security prison with credit for time served and good behavior incentives. Most importantly, Chris entered comprehensive addiction treatment and financial counseling programs. His genuine commitment to recovery and making amends helped repair relationships with Beth and myself. We visited him regularly during his incarceration, and he participated in family therapy sessions that addressed the manipulation and trauma we had all experienced. Beth recovered completely from the digitalis poisoning, though the experience left her with a deeper understanding of how quickly life can change and how important it is to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. She completed her nursing degree with honors and chose to specialize in elder care, partially inspired by what happened to Dad. I want to help protect other families from predators who target vulnerable elderly people, she explained during her graduation celebration. Beth's experience with Patricia had transformed her from someone who avoided conflict into someone who actively advocates for patient safety and family protection. Samuel decided to return to Ohio, permanently ending his 15-year exile from family life. He purchased a small house 10 minutes from Dad's place and began rebuilding relationships that had been fractured by pride and misunderstanding years earlier. Life is too short to waste on old grudges, Samuel reflected during one of our weekly family dinners. Harold's death reminded me that we never know how much time we have with the people we love. Samuel's investigative skills proved valuable in other ways as well. He established a small practice specializing in elder abuse cases, helping other families recognize and document financial exploitation and neglect. His work with our case had given him expertise in a growing problem that affected thousands of families across Ohio. As the primary beneficiary under Dad's original will, I inherited the family house after the courts invalidated the will modification that had been signed under duress shortly before Harold's murder. Rather than simply moving on, I decided to transform our traumatic experience into something that could help other families. I established the Harold Mitchell Foundation for Elder Protection, using the house as headquarters for a nonprofit organization that provides resources for families dealing with financial abuse and exploitation of elderly relatives. The foundation offers free educational workshops, legal referrals, and support groups for families navigating complex inheritance disputes. Dad always believed in helping neighbors and community, I explained during the foundation's launch event. This feels like the right way to honor his memory while ensuring that what happened to our family can help protect others. The foundation's work has already helped dozens of families recognize warning signs of elder abuse and manipulation. We provide practical guidance on setting up financial monitoring systems, recognizing signs of undue influence, and coordinating with law enforcement when crimes are suspected. Beth serves on the foundation's board while working as a charge nurse at a senior care facility. Her medical expertise and personal experience with family manipulation make her uniquely qualified to identify situations where elderly patients might be at risk from relatives or caregivers seeking to exploit them. Chris will be released from prison in 18 months, with plans to work for Samuel's investigation practice while rebuilding his relationship with his sons. Patricia's parents have been caring for the boys during Chris's incarceration, and family therapy has helped the children understand their mother's crimes without blaming themselves or their father. Daddy made mistakes with money, but Mommy chose to hurt people. 8-year-old Tyler explained to me during a recent visit. We still love Daddy, but we know Mommy has to stay in prison so she can't hurt anyone else. The boys' understanding and resilience have been remarkable, supported by excellent counseling and the love of extended family members who ensure they feel secure and valued despite their mother's crimes. Our family's healing process hasn't been simple or quick, but it has been genuine. We learned that love and trust can survive even devastating betrayal when people are willing to take responsibility for their actions and work toward making amends. Chris's gambling addiction was real and serious, but Patricia's manipulation had made his recovery nearly impossible by constantly undermining his self-control and feeding his desperation. In treatment away from her toxic influence, he has shown remarkable progress toward understanding his triggers and developing healthy coping strategies. I realize now that Patricia wasn't trying to help me win back what I lost. Chris reflected during one of our prison visits. She was making sure I kept losing so she could use my desperation to justify increasingly extreme actions. The Foundation's work continues to grow with plans to expand services throughout Ohio and potentially neighboring states. We've partnered with law enforcement agencies to provide training on elder abuse investigation techniques and worked with legislators to strengthen legal protections for vulnerable elderly citizens. Every day, I'm reminded that Dad's death, while tragic and criminal, ultimately led to justice being served and systems being improved to protect other families. Patricia's greed and violence destroyed her own life while strengthening the bonds between those of us who survived her schemes. As I finish sharing this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever noticed warning signs that someone in your family might be manipulating or exploiting an elderly relative? Elder abuse often starts with small financial irregularities and emotional manipulation before escalating to more serious crimes. Trust your instincts, document what you observe, and don't hesitate to seek help if something feels wrong. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find information that might protect their families. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories about family conflicts, justice, and healing. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from understanding how manipulation and financial abuse can escalate into life-threatening situations. And please comment below if you've experienced similar family dynamics, or if you have questions about recognizing elder abuse warning signs. Thank you for listening to my family's story. I hope sharing our experience helps protect other families from predators who see elderly relatives as opportunities rather than people deserving love and respect. Remember that justice is possible. Healing takes time, and family bonds built on genuine love can survive even the most devastating betrayals. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never hesitate to fight for the people you love.